This is Things Police See, First-Hand Accounts, with your host, Steve Gold.
Welcome to the podcast that interviews active and retired police officers about their most intense, bizarre, and sometimes humorous moments on the job. Guys, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. It is I, Old Gingerface, coming at you live, recorded at the studio. Thank you for being here. Thank you for all the recent rating and reviewing. It's still important to me. I know I don't harp on it as much because I feel satisfied with how many I have now, which is great. But if you do love the show and you want to support it, that's a good way to do it. 5 stars only, please. If you really love the show, you can do that on Patreon. Link is in the show notes. A few different levels there. Basically, just showing your love for the show and appreciation. If you listen to a million of the episodes and you love it, and you're thinking, how can I show my appreciation to Steve? It's just give me some money. That's it. But with the Patreon membership, you do get certain little extras, and it's a fun little community. So I would urge you to do that if you got some extra money, you got some extra shekels kicking around. If you don't, not a big deal. The main show, in episodes will remain free so that the maximum amount of people can hear these men and women of law enforcement tell you exactly what it is actually like to go to some of these crazy ass calls. That's the whole point of the show. So if you do sign up, you will get the 2 Cops in the News a month. It's a live stream topical show with the great Ken Roybal and Ben Peters are on there with me usually, and it's a lot of fun. And you will get that, and you'll get I will mail you a 3x3, a beautiful 3x3 vinyl sticker, podcast sticker. You'll have full access to me. What else could you ask for? And in the little community we have going on there. So it's good. If you can afford it, please do. Thank you very much. I'm excited for today's episode. I'm always excited, but this one's great. I've been trying to set this up for a while. Me and the guest were just going back and forth with either my date wouldn't work or his didn't, or it's not that uncommon. So I'm excited to finally be able to connect with him. He has had a great career thus far. He did 12 years Tulsa PD. He's a Vietnam veteran, Afghan vet, retired 20th Special Forces. He's director, Homeland Security program at Mississippi College. He's written 3 textbooks, 5 novels, over 75 journal publications. Without further ado, let me bring on the great Godfrey Garner. Godfrey.
Hey, buddy. How you doing?
It's good, man. Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, it's great to be with you.
You're in Mississippi, obviously.
Right. I'm in a little town called Clinton, Mississippi. It's between Jackson and Vicksburg on right off Interstate 20. It's home of Mississippi College.
It's got to be humid, brother.
Yeah, it's humid and hot. It's been that way for quite a while.
Yeah, we get it bad in New England too. The other day we had a parade that we had to do, and it was worst possible. It was great. Everything went fine, but I know you know this weather. Pouring rain, 100% humidity, pouring rain. Right before the parade, the sky's clear. The sun comes out like a blaring missile on your skin. The vapor, it's like you're standing inside of a clam bake.
Right. I know exactly.
Full humidity. You were getting fried by the vapor in the air. And that was how, and then after the parade, there was a big barbecue in an open field. It was like, brother, it was so hot.
I didn't think you all experienced any humidity in Massachusetts, so that surprises me.
Oh, it's bad. Yeah, it was, I think it was like 90 in probably close to 80s, 90s in humidity. And it was, I felt like I would, put it this way, by the end of the whole event, I felt like I was wearing a wet diaper. Just walk.
Well, that's a good prep work to come down to Mississippi and visit for a little bit. You just slide right in there then.
No problem. Probably pass out. So you started your police career with Tulsa, which is, if we're talking atmospheres, is much drier, much more, I think, doable.
Yeah. There's a lot. Weather conditions are a lot better, and I went on to Tulsa Police Department in 1972. And I'd gone to school at Oklahoma University for a couple of years prior to that, because I got out of the service the first time in '68. I did a couple of tours in Vietnam, and then got out in '68. Went to school at Oklahoma University for a couple of years there in Norman, and then got on the police department in Tulsa, and I was there for 12 years before I left.
Yeah, Tulsa's it's a good sized little city, and there's a few colleges there, isn't there?
Yeah, Tulsa University is there, and of course there's some extension camps. Langston University has a branch there. NEOSU, Northeastern Oklahoma University, State University has in Tahlequah, which is not very far from Tulsa. So there's quite a few schools there.
Gotcha. So what made you
Nice city, nice place.
yeah. Did you want to work at Tulsa PD, or you just wanted to be a cop and they had openings?
Well, at that time, I had applied for several departments. I had applied for Wichita Police Department, and I just about went to work there. But something happened right towards the end. I had a physical problem that they didn't clear their physical requirements. But I had applied at Tulsa, and then Tulsa came up right after that. So I was really fortunate that it worked out that way, because I think I'd been much happier in Tulsa than I would have been in Wichita. But it worked out real well. And then went through a divorce like most cops do, one or two along the road, and wound up coming back to Mississippi and starting graduate school and teaching college for a while. And then when Desert Storm came up, I got back in the military again. That's why I wound up going to Afghanistan later, and had to stay into my 60th birthday just to get 20 years in so I could retire from the military. I was in the National Guard the second time I joined up.
Okay. So when you went to Tulsa PD, what year was it? Like your first year?
72. Started the academy in February of 72.
And what was the academy like then?
We had actually, I teach about that in a few of the classes that I work on, but there's several different styles of training academies, as you know. And Tulsa Academy was one of those 8 hour a day academies. So you go to class in the morning, you report in, and you go to class and you leave in the afternoon and go home. So you don't stay overnight or anything. And at that time, we were wearing civilian clothes to the academy classes and didn't wear a uniform until the last week or so of class, just to get used to it. But all through the academy, we wore civilian clothes.
Oh,
I'll
interesting.
tell you a funny little story about that you might enjoy. Back during the time I started the department, and I'm sure a lot of your guests have told you this, the criteria was a lot different for being a police officer than it is today. But I noticed you've got a good little beard and mustache going. Of course, that would not have been accepted in police work years ago.
Yeah.
But when I was on the department, female officers were just coming in. They were just being hired, but at that time they were being hired to do specific jobs. Like a female officer would go directly into sex crimes investigations or the juvenile division and investigations. They wouldn't go out on the street. While I was actually first couple of years I was there on the department, the officer or female officers started going out on the street and actually doing patrol jobs. So there's a lot of difference. There's a lot of things that were done differently during that time. But what I was getting at is one of the things that would really knock you out of being a police officer is if you had a tattoo. So if you had a tattoo of any kind, that was pretty well going to limit you from being an officer then. Well, I had a tattoo, still have it obviously, on my forearm that I'd gotten in China when I was in the military the first time. And fortunately, they didn't ask me about markings like that or anything when I went through the application process. And of course, I never brought it up. And during the police academy, I wore a long sleeve shirt all the time. We had to wear a shirt and tie to class every day. So I wore a long sleeve shirt to the academy class every day. And all the way through the academy, right up until the last day, graduation, I had my arms covered up. So the tattoo never showed.
Mm.
Well, the last day of the academy class, we came in and we were in uniform, and it was summer uniform at that time, so we were in short sleeves. And I happened to be sitting on the very end of the table, this conference type tables with all of the other graduating recruits. And I was on the very end where the academy director walked down the aisle towards the podium, and he walked right past me and didn't even turn around. He just stopped dead in his tracks and backed up 2 steps and looked down at my arm, and he said, "You report to duty Monday." This was Friday afternoon. He said, "By Monday, you have that tattoo covered up." So I had to go all the way to New Orleans and have some additions made to my tattoo. That was the only place at that time you could get a tattoo in the U.S. So
Wow.
just a funny little story there.
Yeah.
Things were different back during those days. So.
Yeah, I had the first department I worked at was pretty traditional, and I had to wear a skin-colored sleeve.
Oh, really?
Yep. It was, in the summer it was miserable, and of course when you're in the car alone, you just take it off, and then if you have a call, you
right. Yeah.
put it on. But I only had this part of the forearm tattoo done. But once they started making me wear the sleeve, I was like, well, might as well get more because I got to cover it up anyways.
Oh, yeah.
But now with the law enforcement crisis in the country, they're kind of like, hey, we allow tattoos. You can have a beard. Like they're kind of giving it all away.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I know I don't want to lead the conversation or anything. So if I'm getting off, get me back on track. But I was going to say something along those lines that, I'm working on another textbook now. I've written the 3 and I'm under contract for another one now. This one is on police culture. It's a textbook that's basically updating the police culture, the things that are different from the last textbook that was written along those lines. So a couple of weeks ago, I was on the road. I drove out to LA and I stopped at various large police departments between here and there to conduct some interviews with officers that were willing to talk to me about things that cops talk about by themselves, that they wouldn't discuss with non-police officers,
Sure.
And one of the things that kept popping up every time I interviewed officers was the concerns over the caliber of recruits that departments are bringing in now. And whether it's valid or not, the perception on the part of these officers was that they were not satisfied with the level of criteria that were being required of the officers coming on the department now. So just changes in attitudes and so forth. But that's what I'm trying to uncover with this textbook.
Yeah, that's interesting because I did work at I don't know if you knew this, but I worked as a background investigator. I used to do backgrounds for LAPD, and that was a big concern in backgrounds. They were lowering the bar all the time, or they would just be like, don't look too hard into that, like they would, because it used to be LAPD had a magic number for marijuana use. They never told anybody. But if you said you used it over this, see you later. If you were below it, a note was made, but you moved forward. And that number just started to become a moving number. And the other thing LAPD used to do was they've made up their own affirmative action, which it's not even legal, but no one complains because it's woke. But they'll put out there that, hey, we had an academy of, it was a majority Hispanic and black, or all females, or whatever. And, you could be a background investigator with a white guy who just got out of the military, who was a captain, was an officer, who's fantastic, and he's having trouble getting a seat. I mean, so racism, right? What else do you call it? It's the color of his skin is keeping him out of the game. So those type of things, and we see it in corporations with the DEI stuff, it's like we're going to shoehorn people in. We're going to lower the standards on medical school entrances so it looks like we're not offensive. And then guess what? You're going to have a doctor that isn't the best doctor you could have.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you're saying, yeah.
And I think the cops are feeling that.
Yeah. yeah, that, and like I said, that kept popping up whenever I would talk to guys on the way out. And I had a lot of trouble getting police officers to talk to me because there's so many, they're under so much control now by the federal government. Federal government has got these mandates on police departments all across the country, and these officers are they're real reluctant to talk about things like this, even to a retired officer. And I went out of my way to make sure they understood the confidentiality of what we were doing and what I was trying to come up with and stuff. But I still had a lot of trouble getting officers to talk to me about stuff because they were just, they just didn't want to stick their neck out there. So
Hey, I tell you what,
kind of
Godfrey, we can have a conversation. I'll stick my neck way out.
sad. Well, I'm still working on it. I got about 2 years to write this book, so I'm going to be digging into it as much as possible. So, but it's going to be fun. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I can't wait to see the results. That's great. Godfrey, can you go back to your early days as an officer, to the first call that you would have considered as a new cop, your first hot call, the first call when you really had an adrenaline dump?
Well, the first one that I really recalled for a long time was a high speed chase, and I think for most officers that first real adrenaline pump comes from things like high speed chases and so forth because of the danger involved in it and so forth. But one of the things I wrote about in the book we were talking about earlier is there have been some studies done with police officers that over things that stick with them throughout their career, and most of those studies focus on acts of violence or things where they've had calls where they saw their first death, their first DOA.
Absolutely.
The circumstances surrounding those cases generally, according to these studies, sort of dictate a career that an officer will have based on that first really violent act that he sees or he experienced in his career. It has an effect on how he does his job from that point on, or how he approaches the job and so forth. It's a lot more complicated than that, obviously. But the first call I went on that actually stuck with me for a long time wasn't necessarily an adrenaline dump, pretty much, but it was a homicide. And I was still riding with a trained officer at the time. I remember it, but that stuck with me for years, and I wrote about it in that book actually. So it was the victim was a 2-year old,
Ooh.
and the perpetrator, the person that actually committed the murder, was a 12-year-old boy, and he had obviously severe mental problems, but this family had taken him in because his mother and dad had abandoned him, and he killed their daughter one night about 2 o'clock in the morning. He just woke up and something came over him, and he went in the
Oh my
uh,
gosh.
nursery where this 2-year-old was, and woke her up. And apparently, he was trying to molest her in some way, and she started crying, and he smothered her and killed her.
Ugh.
He took her body down in the basement of the house. And in some of these basements in these old houses, the wiring is exposed in the top of the basement, in the ceiling of the basement. So he took her body and wedged it in that wiring. So she was actually in the ceiling hanging. Her body was stuck up in the wiring there. And of course, you could see her, but you couldn't unless you looked up.
Mm.
And her father and I happened to be wandering around the house looking for her body because they realized she was gone, and they called the police. So we came over to try to look for her. We thought she had walked out of the house or something, but it was like 15 degrees outside, so we knew that wasn't it. And the last place we looked was in the basement, and we were walking around down there, and all of a sudden something told him to look up, and he looked up, and there his daughter was
Oh.
hanging from the wires where she had been up. And I remember the first thing he did was he threw up. The emotion got to him real quick, obviously, and his
Yeah.
response was before, and he threw up. And I always remembered that. That had a real impact on me for years and years. So,
Oh my gosh, that is so sad. And at that point, you
yeah,
know, like, oh, she didn't just wander off. Like, someone
yeah,
did
yeah,
that.
yeah. Well, we had kind of figured that something had happened. We just couldn't find her, and it was just a real accident that her dad happened to look up like that and find her instead of me, or somebody. But
Oh, spook!
anyway,
I'm in my basement right now, looking up at my Raptors, and I have those wires, brother.
yeah,
Um. So, was the kid still in the house?
he had a paper route. He was maybe 13 or 14. He was old enough to have a paper route, and he had left early that morning to go do his paper route. He killed her before he left. And of course, the parents, everybody was still asleep when he walked out of the house and went to do his paper route. So we didn't even really suspect him until we had talked to him a little bit later, and then he admitted to it. But the strange thing about it was he was sent to a juvenile mental institution. The court sent him and turned him in this juvenile mental institution. And while he was in there, his actual parents came back and took custody of him and got him out for a weekend furlough one time. And while he was out on the weekend, he killed another kid that was a child of their neighbor. So
You're kidding me! Oh my
yeah,
gosh!
I never will forget the guy's name. I don't want to say it on the air, but his name still sticks with me. And I don't know. I never have tried to find out what happened to him, but I'm sure he's probably still in prison somewhere.
Yeah, I mean,
But
at that point, just put him down. Like, put the kid down. He's
yeah,
no good. It's like an
yeah,
evil kid. What's going on here?
yeah. Not a lot you can do with somebody like that. But anyway, that was my first exposure to non combat related deaths. And even though I had seen a lot of combat casualties in Vietnam, of course, that had a drastic effect on me. I can even still remember her mouth was slightly open and I could see her little teeth,
Oh,
uh, little baby teeth, and I can still remember what those teeth looked like for some reason. I don't know why I think about that,
yeah.
but it does, you know. And gosh, I'm 77 years old now. I guess I was 26, 27 or something when that happened. I don't know, but
That's incredible. It's
I,
incredible what you remember, how that type of thing sticks with you.
you know,
Yeah, those.
but that's what I was saying about that study showed that the first death. See, if the first death I'd ever witnessed on a police department was a natural cause death or something, it would have had a different effect on my career as opposed to that more violent one. So, but it was an interesting study anyway.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I've repeated this before, and I get my chops busted here if I. "Hey, Steve, you always say the same story, like because I'm trying to relate to guests, but I'll say it
Well, I haven't
briefly because the first like death I had that was like personal to me as an officer when I was a brand new officer was like a local guy, a bartender who I had just bought a sandwich from him. I knew him. His name was Ed, and I responded back for a man down like 3 hours later, and it was Ed, and he was, there was like a cook from the kitchen or one of the hostesses from the kitchen. They were cleaning up, impishly trying to do CPR on, didn't know what she was doing, but knew what it looked like. And like you said, I'll never forget that his mouth, like the O face, his teeth were exposed, his eyes, and it really bothered me for quite some time.
Oh yeah, I bet.
No violence, but it was just I knew him, and now he was dead. It was like to me, it was like I was like my sergeant even said like he afterwards he's like, you all right? Yeah, I know you knew Ed or whatever, and I'm like, yeah, it spooked me, and he's like,
I bet
he,
you did.
he-
Yeah, I
he's like,
bet.
yeah, you were. He goes, you were a bit green, and I go, I thought he meant I was new, and I was like, well, I am new, and he's like, no, your skin color was green.
Well, that's what takes a special person to be able to do something like that and handle it and continue on. And not everybody can do it, as you know that very well. So,
Yeah, the weird thing is like every time after that the fire department went off, or like if I knew it was going to be like it gave me like anxiety.
Yeah,
Like a rescue call, like ooh. And then I was like, but I luckily I am the kind of person that's like I need to face it down, defeat that, and because I want to be a cop. You know what I mean?
Makes you stronger after a while. Once you get adjusted to it, makes you a stronger person. It really does.
Yeah, I think so. You grow those calluses, you know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that was a great and crazy story, brother. Can you think back in your career and describe like a really strange or bizarre thing you dealt with?
Well, actually, I don't mean to be jumping ahead or anything, but that book I wrote was about an actual murder that occurred in Tulsa that was committed by three police officers. And of all of the cases that I was ever peripherally involved in,
The balance of
that
Exodus, is that what you mean?
of Exodus, yeah,
Yep.
that story, that event, that murder was was actually the weirdest one because of all of the circumstances surrounding it, and it was well, of course, the book itself goes into telling the whole story about how it
Sure.
happened, why it happened, and the motives behind it, and so forth. But this girl was murdered with a crossbow. One of the officers shot her and killed her with a crossbow. But the three of them conspired together and actually put it together and pulled it off. The funny thing about it, not funny, but the ironic thing about it was these three officers were like brother officers. You know how cops can get so close to each other; they're much closer than they are to their own family members.
Sure.
And these three cops had gone through the academy together, and they had this relationship that had bonded them, tighter than any siblings I had ever seen. And it turned out that the one that actually had the least culpability in her murder took the rap for it, and he wound up going to prison for it, though he shouldn't have. And he did it on purpose to protect the other two officers. So, and again, there was a lot more to it than that. There's, a lot more explanation to it. But if you talk about weird and unusual, that's probably the weirdest, unusual, most unusual thing that I've ever been involved in as an officer.
So how
So,
what are the circumstances of shooting somebody with a crossbow?
well, these three guys were avid hunters too, and they hunted with crossbows, so they were familiar with using one. They were probably more familiar with using a crossbow than they were a high-powered rifle or anything like that. So they just decided to do that, and I think they weren't thinking real clearly, but I think that they figured that they could get away with it a little bit easier if they used a crossbow instead of a rifle of some kind. Now, how they figured that and all of the details that went into that, I'm not sure, but that had a lot to do with it. So she just walked out of a apartment door, and turned around, and one of them was over behind the bushes and shot her right in the chest,
What
killed
was
her.
what's why did this happen? Is what I mean. Like what?
They had to put the whole thing in a little ball. One of the three officers had had a child with her. They were not married, but she had decided after the child was born that she didn't want anything to do with it. So she gave the baby actually to these three officers, or to this one officer, to the father of the officer. She just said, "Here, you raise it. I don't want anything to do with it." And she just disappeared. And so these three guys came together and basically raised that kid for a number of months. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was pretty close to a
Like
year or
my three
so.
dads.
Yep, sort of like that. And then all of a sudden she popped back up on the scene and decided she was going to go to court and take the child back. And it turned out that she could have done it. She was, the mother, the birth mother, so she was actually going to get the custody of the child back. So that's why they decided to kill her and did it, to keep her from getting the baby. So
Wow. Yeah. I mean, was she a drug addict, or would it have been bad for the baby? Like, did they have good motive?
I didn't know that much about her, but I would imagine, obviously she wasn't much of a
Mom.
human being as far as
Right.
I'm concerned, so to do something like that. But yeah, sure she had her things going on. So, but that's why they killed her to keep her from getting the baby. And they of course obviously planned on getting away with it. But and as it turned out, two of them basically did because the third one took rap for it. You know, I don't know whether he's still in prison or not, but I remember I had a conversation with him one time when I was on a plane. Him and I were going with a bunch of, I was president of the Fraternal Order of Police for a couple of years there in Tulsa, and we were going to play a police football game with another police department somewhere else, and we were on this plane flying to go do this thing, and I was sitting next to the guy that took the rap on it, and he was talking to me. These guys were real religious. They were real spiritual. They had a real connection to God and the way they saw it and so forth. And he was saying some things to me. He was talking out loud to himself more than anything else. But I remember that conversation. I didn't know anything about the murder at the time. This was before they had been pulled into it, and that's where I got the title from the book because he was saying something about things having to balance out in life. There has to be a philosophical balance to things. When somebody does something wrong, there has
Mm.
to be something to right that wrong and bring things back into balance and so forth. So that's where I pulled the title from the book. But he wasn't really even talking to me. He was just talking out loud to himself.
Trying to justify it to
But
himself, I'm sure.
and then later on, when things started falling into place, I realized what had happened. But I used to teach when I started teaching college. I used to use that murder to teach other concepts like investigating crime scene investigations and courtroom situations and criminal evidence and criminal law type things. I'd use that situation and bring it out and tell the students, well, I remember this one time in this murder, because when you do that with kids, they remember it
Oh yeah.
and they remember the concepts you're trying to teach them. And so finally, one day, I decided I'd done it so many times in the classroom. I decided I'd go ahead and write the book, and that was the first book I ever wrote. So
That's very cool. Yeah, that is crazy. I mean, humans are capable, as you know, of anything. But the that
if you knew these guys, you can't justify anything like that ever. But if you knew these guys, and you and I'm not trying to justify it either, obviously, but in their mind, what they did was something that had to be done in their mind. So
yeah. So they use their, they probably went Old Testament and said, all right, let me read the Old Testament here. Eye for an eye, baby.
very much, very much so.
Yeah, it's like so. It's so. I'm a Christian, and it's like, can you just stop for a second and just think real hard what Jesus would, what would he say if you were at a conference with him? Hey, this is our plan. Would he say, yes, murder this woman? Or would he say, don't do it? You know?
Yeah, that's a good idea. Go for it.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. And it just frustrates me too, because it's like, there's this saying out there that I forget, it's a popular Christian guy. He said, if someone plays Mozart poorly, do you blame Mozart? No. You blame that guy. So if somebody does
Yeah.
Christianity poorly, don't blame Christ. Like it's not his fault.
I've never heard that before, but I'm a Christian also, and that's something I'm going to remember. That's a good analogy. Very good.
Yeah, we need some defenses here. Jeez, that is really crazy, man. Wow, it's really sad too. I mean, like you're saying too, like you knew these guys personally, so like you can probably say in your mind, like, well, these guys really thought they were being righteous. They thought they were like protecting the kid. They probably bonded with the kid.
Oh yeah, so yeah, very definitely.
They really thought
They
that.
had they had their own little life before she came back into the picture, and it was a perfect life to them. just like if they lived the next 100 years in that scenario and died still in that scenario, they would have lived the perfect life.
And here's the question of the hour is, did they keep the kid?
Oh, no, no, no. Yeah. I don't actually tell you the truth. After all of this, I don't know what really ever happened to the child. I think he probably went to one of her family members, her mother or grandmother or something like that. So, and I lost contact with the guy that wound up going to prison, and I'm not sure whether he was sentenced to life, but I'm sure he was probably paroled at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you do then? It's like, all right, well, now her mom's getting the kid. God said to kill their whole family. Oh my gosh.
Anyway, that was a fun book to write too, though. But you asked the craziest thing I ever was involved in as a cop. That was it. Now there were a lot more lesser impacting crazy things, but that was probably the most.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds fascinating. The book is probably fantastic with all the details extrapolated
Well,
out.
I don't know how well it was written. It was my first book, so it's probably not the best thing in the world. But,
Godfrey, don't say that. It's the best book in the world. Come on, buddy.
Okay, we'll go with that.
Well, you're a copper, and you're also a professor, so I think it's probably a pretty damn good book. That's what I'm guessing. Godfrey, can you tell us about your most intense or terrifying call that you experienced on the job?
Well, I had a guy pull a knife on me one time, and he was actually trying to kill me with this knife, and I did something without thinking about it, which saved my life, but it wasn't planned out. Um, I opened a door where this guy was holding somebody hostage in there or something, and when I opened the door, as soon as I opened it, he charged at me with this knife. It looked like it was about 6 feet long, but it was probably only a foot or so, kitchen knife of some kind. And right before he got to me, I just slammed the door, and he ran into the door. He was drugged out and stuff, and dropped it. But slamming that door like that accidentally, or just off the top of my head, that probably kept me from getting stabbed or whatever. But and I'm sure there were a lot of other incidents, but that one sticks out in my mind. The homicide the homicide detective, worked the follow up on this case later on, and he told me the next time that ever happened, just go ahead and shoot the guy, and he'd cover for it. So that was back in the old days when you could do stuff like that and get by with it. So things were a lot different then. So.
Yeah, but now they gave us a 21-foot rule, so if a guy has a knife, he's coming at you, you're clear to shoot him. But, I mean, he was probably so close that was actually probably the best move, because even if you'd shot him, as we all know, it doesn't immediately take the life out of somebody. He definitely could have got that blade in you, so I think you made the right choice there.
Yeah, it was a spur of the moment choice. Yeah, but that was, but there were a lot of other things. Like I said, I was talking about the high speed chases. Those are probably the most dangerous things I've ever been involved in, because you've been involved in them before. You know how that is when a high speed chase is either going to end with somebody being killed or some massive traffic accident of some kind, and it's just as likely to be you as it is anybody else. But as far as getting the old adrenaline pumping and really getting scared about something, those are probably the most. But anyway,
in the Northeast, they've really cut back. Like we are not the Midwest or the West Coast. The Northeast, I think in general, is congested, and just as a rule of thumb now, it's even when I first started in the early 2000s, it chasing is kind of like we call our speeds in. It gets too fast unless it's like a serious felony.
Yeah.
We just disengage for those exact reasons, for safety of the public, safety of the police. I'm on the fence about it because it has created a culture of people running all the time.
Yeah, I bet.
Which is frustrating for a
It
cop.
was beginning to go that direction back when I was a cop. It was beginning to get that way too.
I mean, on the West Coast, they pit people like pitting California stops out in the Northeast is like strictly forbidden. You are not, unless a very special circumstance, you do not come in contact with another vehicle with the intention of making it spin out. That you would be in big trouble. But I just had Eric Tung on. He's a Washington cop, and if the circumstances are right, it gets approved, and they try to pit. They try to, spin them out.
Spin them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we used to do that too, periodically. But
so all that to say, we're kind of off the hook.
yeah, yeah. But anyway, I had probably a lot more humorous things happen than really serious serious incidents. Those are a lot more fun to talk about anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Let it rip.
Yeah, actually, I tell my students a lot of times that drunk drivers are the most fun to work with. I can say that from experience because I spent a lot of my years partaking myself up until I decided that wasn't the best route to go. So
Yeah.
I remember one of my Cherokee Indian cop buddy of mine that he and I were partners for years. We worked an extra shift program for a long time just to pick up some extra money. I don't know whether you're probably too young to ever hear about it, but it was a program called RID, RID, and it stood for something about drunk drivers. But anyway, you'd go out and work an extra shift, and all you do is just go out all night long looking for drunk drivers. Well, this buddy of mine and I were sharing a trailer at the time, living together. So whenever we would go in the evening, we'd work from about 8 in the evening until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Whenever we would go out, one of the two of us would stop and buy a pint of bourbon. And when we'd get through with the shift, we'd stop off at a 7-Eleven and get a couple of big gulps filled halfway.
Hell yeah.
And then split that between the two of us and talk about all the drunk drivers we arrested all night. On the way home, we'd kill that pint of bourbon. So I wouldn't tell anybody that if I was still working, but
sure.
Anyway, we had actually I wrote about this in that book, but we had one incident where it was a rainy night, just miserable night in the early fall. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, we hadn't done anything all night long, just try to stay awake. And we were driving down this 4-lane road, 2 going one direction and 2 the other with a big center media. And we were coming up on an intersection the same way, same width going the other direction. And we noticed a car in the left-hand turn lane up ahead of us because we saw the tail lights. And anyway, we came up behind the car, and the closer we got, the more we realized the car was a little bit further over to the left than it should be just to be in the turn lane. And then when we got close enough, we realized that the reason it had is because it had jumped the center media, and all 4 wheels were sitting up off the ground. And the guy was sitting there behind the wheel of the car. And we didn't know it at the time, but anyway, we pulled up behind, turned the overheads on, and of course he didn't even realize it. And I got out of the car and started walking up there, and my buddy told me he'd stay in the car and wait unless I needed him. So we knew it wasn't going to be much to it. So as I was walking up, I realized that the guy was actually sitting behind the wheel of the car, still driving. And all 4 wheels of the car up off the ground, and he was just sitting there. His glasses had slid down across the bridge of his nose, and the windows were all fogged up. And he was just sitting there drunk as a skunk, just driving down the road. So I walked up to the windshield, or to the window, driver's window, and knocked on the window, and he was still driving, and he looked up at me like that, and then looked back driving again, and then all of a sudden it hit him, and he looked back like that. And when he did, he hit the gas and tried to drive away from me.
Let me get away from this apparition.
I stood there beside his window and acted like I was running alongside the car. My buddy back in the car was just sitting there dying laughing. And finally, I just banged on the window and woke him up. But we used to have some fun working with the drunk driver, so it was a lot of fun.
That's hilarious. You actually pretended you were running like super fast.
Yeah, yeah, I was running alongside him, yeah, trying to catch up to him. So, but um, but anyway, yeah, Tulsa was a neat place to work. There were during that time there were a lot of Vietnam vets on the department. Um, I used to say that guys got out of Vietnam, they'd either go into police work or they'd become criminals, one of the two. So luckily, I went the right direction, so I could just as easily have gone the other way, I suppose. But Tulsa was a real good department. They had a real good work ethic. They had good administration. They followed, good quality police work and so forth. And it was a good place to learn the trade. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like it. Godfrey, do you have a positive or dare I say heartwarming encounter you can tell us about?
Uh, you know, Not really right off the top of my head. I know I'm sure there were a lot of things that if I sat down and thought about them for a long time, I'd come up with some. But the times I had an opportunity to work with young people. You see some young kids out on the street every once in a while, and you have a chance to sort of steer them in the right direction a little bit. You work with them for a while. Those were always good encounters. And I worked with a lot of really great older officers that taught me not just how to be a good cop, but how to do the right things. And I'm not saying I always did the right things because I didn't by a long shot, but I had guys around me that would show me the right way anyway. So and that's about it really.
Yeah. I'm sure you did. I mean, was Tulsa, did you have the freedom to like say you catch some kids doing vandalism? Did you have the freedom there or the time to catch them, bring them back, make a deal and be like, hey, they're going to come back on Saturday and paint this over? Could you do stuff like that, like creative sentencing on the street?
Yeah, and a lot of times we'd call their parents and get their parents involved in it. And, you know, we had a lot of freedom to do things like that. We weren't real highly restricted. And every once in a while you'd have an officer that come on that they're going to be by the book. They're going to do everything strictly by the book, by the letter, regardless of what it said. They put their own mother in jail if she was out drunk or something.
Sorry, Mom, you were speeding.
Those guys were they were kind of hard to work with a little bit. But the majority of the guys that I worked with, and the majority of people that I learned from, were people that knew when those occasions were where you could bend the rules and do things that would have the ultimate good or have the greater good and so forth. And that's another thing that I found gathering data for that book. That attitude seems to be going by the wayside too, because cops they're so afraid now that if they bend the rules somewhere or they violate something somewhere, they don't do it exactly. If they're not covered 100% by everything they do, it seems like the job is just not as much fun anymore as it was when I was a cop. Of course, all old guys always say that, but it does. It seems like it's changed quite a bit than the way it was when I was doing it. So.
Yeah, I can totally understand what you're saying. I mean, especially where I work, is that Massachusetts is a very litigious state, so it's very, it's crazy with liability. And like having been a police officer, the greatest tool we have is our discretion. So people don't like it. They don't like the fact that, oh, well, you say I get a ticket, but the next guy or girl you pull over gets a warning. Well, what's that all about? Well, it's like, well, believe me, that's the way you want it. Like, you don't want us like robots. Like we have the ability to look at your driving history. We have the ability to gauge your attitude. We can tell if you need to get hit in the purse or not. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We can tell, and that's what they taught us in academy was you'll be able to tell who's earned themselves a citation and who and the person that's shaking and has no driving history and is really sorry, yeah, you don't need to write them a $200 ticket. This is enough. Just the contact is enough. But they are kind of instilling that fear, especially where even when I first started, it was like, I work for supervisors that were like, someone's registration had expired. So they still have insurance. They just didn't renew their license plate. So if they hit somebody else, they're still covered. But because the law says the vehicle has no right to remain on the roadway, a police officer should tow the vehicle. The days of like, well, hey, I just live a mile down there. You know me. I'm a local guy. I will get this taken care of. And nowadays we can let them do it roadside with the internet on their phone. They can usually renew it, roadside renewal. I've worked in the past with supervisors that were like, they would go up and down you if you wrote a written warning or a verbal warning and let them drive home. You just put your career, my career on the line. It's like, whoa. Do you think a jury in the world is going to see it that way? Like they're going to take our jobs because you gave a mom with 2 kids in a minivan who just is a week over expiration, still has insurance, just forgot. Do you think we need to tow her vehicle? And then now we have to somehow magically transport her children? Like it's going to take hours of our time to hammer this single mom. Or can we just let her drive a mile to her house and
I know exactly what you mean.
And take care of it.
We could do that in the old days. Yeah, in the old days we could do that all the time and get by with it, and nobody'd say a word about it. But
I still do it. I've done that recently. If I'm putting myself out there, then what?
Think twice about it. So when you do it.
Yeah. No, I did.
We'd do it before without even thinking twice about it. But I know it probably weighs on you when you do something like that.
Oh, I make them promise. I'm like, you're going home.
Yeah. You put yourself out on a limb when you get out of line just a little bit. And cops can't really do the job like that. I mean, they can't really do what they're supposed to. That's the reason that connection between the cops and the public is not what it was when I was a cop either. We had much more of a bond between officers and the public than you do now. And that's why I admire you guys that are doing it now, because it takes a lot more than it did when I was doing it. Of course, it's probably a lot easier to get shot now than it was when I was doing it.
Right. My dad said the same thing. He was a cop 32 years. He retired, I think, 15 years ago. He retired a lieutenant in a department on Cape Cod. And when I was going into it, he said, "I'm glad I'm getting out rather than going in." Yeah. Because he was a cop late 70s.
That's one of the things I asked these guys in these research for the book is if they came from a family of officers and if they intended to recommend to their kids to go into police work, and majority is that connection's not there anymore. Doesn't seem to be.
Yeah. Yeah, that's sad. It's really tough. Even on I work in a rural department, and I've been on stops where we're being recorded and we're being called racist, and it's like, for a warrant, like you have a warrant. You were speeding, and now I found your warrant. If you weren't going 25 miles an hour over the speed limit, we wouldn't even be talking. But you have a warrant now. But now I'm racist because, and the warrants are, you shall arrest. There's no letting. I'm not letting you go. The whole county just heard I have a warrant stop. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And in my case, I was backing up an officer in a nearby town. It's like we've got no choice in this whole thing. It has nothing to do with the color of your skin. Believe me, sir. This is the last thing we want to deal with. But.
Well, you're using logic, and unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the ability to use logic anymore when they're discussing something like that.
Yeah, like they said in my police academy, they said, you'll be fine as a cop. A cop with common sense will make a great cop. The problem is common sense isn't common, and we need to figure out which one of you has it,
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So, Godfrey, a popular question on the show. A lot of listeners are either in backgrounds or they're thinking about being a cop. And I say it all the time, and I'm going to keep saying it, but I get emails and messages all the time of people who say they listened to Godfrey Garner talk about police work and became a cop. You know what I mean? Like, that's the best. Like, we're making baby cops from the show because they're not sure, and then they hear you guys tell your stories and they go, okay, yes. So what advice would you give to new police officers or prospective police officers coming on the job?
Well, I tell my kids that regardless of all the ins and outs about it, it's the most fun you'll ever have with your clothes on. But there, that's the main thing about police work is it can have boring moments, but as a career, it's the most exciting career that you can ever get into. And you can live, like I said, I'm 77 years old and I make a halfway decent living, and that money doesn't change anything, doesn't make anything more enjoyable or whatever. But the enjoyable aspects of your life, the being happy with what you're doing, that's what makes it all worthwhile. And law enforcement is it's just fun. That's just all there is to it. It's just fun.
That's a great answer, brother. I love it. It's fun. Don't let anybody talk you out of it. You'll like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's excellent. So tell us a little bit more about the book. I mean, you have more than one book, or you've written textbooks and stuff like this. Is this your first and only entry into writing a standalone book that's not like in academia?
Well, no, I've written that and 3 other books. The other 3 were on Afghanistan, the fiction related fiction books.
Like novels.
They're novels on Afghanistan. But then I've written the 3 textbooks, and the textbooks are on intelligence analysis, counterterrorism, and this one, like I said, coming up is on the police culture. But this one was the first one that I wrote that had anything to do with law enforcement. So the only one actually, other than that textbook, had anything to do with law enforcement. My military career was in counterterrorism work and intelligence and counterintelligence and stuff. So that's what I've written most of about in the textbook stuff.
Very cool. Yeah. So this is when you're teaching at the school, is it mostly criminal justice stuff?
Yeah. And it's today we don't have the criminal justice programs anymore. We have the Homeland Security, and Homeland Security involves counterterrorism because law enforcement today is at least as involved in counterterrorism efforts as they are in enforcing the law. So that Homeland Security just broadened the spectrum out so we can pull that in. So mostly what I teach right now have to do with counterterrorism work.
Well, obviously you're making a big impression because one of your students was the person who reached out to me and was like, you have to have Godfrey Garner on the show. Here's his email. Here's his contact. Get this guy on the show. So it seems like you're doing something right.
I must have given him an A or something in his class.
I mean, I have to agree. I took one criminal justice class. I graduated with a computer degree, believe it or not. But I did take an elective criminal justice class, and it was a retired state trooper. And it was the best class I had because exactly like you probably do, he melded his lesson with war stories. And it was like, so, I mean,
you can go too far with that. You can go too far with that if you're not careful.
Yeah, your whole class can just be you telling war stories. But I mean,
yeah, my kids generally know how to steer me into a story if I'm getting too technical on something.
Oh yeah, I'm sure they do. They get you off track. Yeah. So I mean, but nothing is better than having a professor to see the application of something.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Kids remember it a lot better when they can apply it to a story that they heard. Yeah.
And let's be honest. If you've been to college, you know you're gonna deal with a whole bunch of professors that actually have not done much in what they're teaching.
Exactly. I I know what you mean. You're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, if you're such a good business guy, why are you teaching a technical business class?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Too funny. Well, Godfrey, it was an honor to have you on, sir. I'm so glad that we finally connected. Everybody can get the book. The link will be in the show notes for Amazon. Check Godfrey out. And absolutely my pleasure, sir.
Great. Thank you very much, buddy. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And I'm going to do the outro. Are you able to hang on for just like 2 or 3 minutes?
Yeah. Go ahead.
All right, cool. As sometimes happens, guys, I have to set up the Patreon sergeants and above, the rank of sergeant and above, get a shout out on the show. That is what I'm setting up right now. I didn't do so beforehand. Okay. And who I'm talking about is the great Dylan Mosher, John Jordan, everybody, Kyler Napier, the great Ape Good, ladies and gentlemen, Detective Nick Adams, everybody, the great Michael Roach from Roach Machine, AI Solutions, check him out, George Caritosis, love you, buddy, thank you, the great Justin King, Paul Maloney, everyone, J.A. family, thank you, Jessica King, the great Jason Labrie, Bentley Barnett, everybody, Zachary Fleet, Sheriff Ronald Long, everybody, the great Adam McMahon, Clark LaCuff, thank you, sir, the great Nancy Hammond, Zach Haney, everybody, Brad Thompson, Kyle Roberts, the great Elliot Sykes, Richard Tolles, keep on trucking, brother, Doug and Kelly Newman, love you guys, see you at church, Dan Carlson from Burley Boys, check him out, amazing woodworker on Instagram, Scott Young, everybody, the great Dennis Carrasquillo, George Tessier, better known as Zip, see you at church, brother, Iceman from Motorcop Chronicles, check out his podcast, the great Greg Gadboy, Ben Peters, everybody, Scott Minkler, the great Tammy Walsh, Sean Clifford, everyone, Sasha McNabb, the great Jason Lau, Lauren Stimson, everybody, Jake Pinedo, ladies and gentlemen, John Shoemaker, James Rose, Seth Wright, Tony Fahey, William James Long, that's Deputy William James Long to you, the great and powerful Andy Biggs, Chris Jude, Adam Mehall, the great Gary Steiner, and the handsome Lane Campbell. Whew, guys, the list is getting long, and I love it. So if you love the show and you want to see it go on, join the Patreon because they pay the bills. The bills come in and they go out, and I don't got to pay them because of Patreon. I'm so thankful. The link is in the show notes, but the show will remain free. Rest assured. I love you guys, and I'll see you next week.